Welcome to The Stacks, a podcast about books and the people who read them. I'm your host, Tracy Thomas, and our guest today is Stephanie Foo, the author of What My Bones Know, a memoir of healing from complex trauma. Stephanie is a writer and radio producer, most recently on This American Life. We talked today about how Stephanie approached writing about her diagnosis of complex PTSD as she was working on healing from it, generational trauma, and communal healing. The Stacks Book Club pick for March is A Mercy by Toni Morrison, and we will be discussing the book on the podcast on March 30th with Imani Perry. If you like The Stacks and want more of it, please head to patreon.com/thestacks to join the Stacks Pack. You get exclusive perks like bonus episodes, virtual book club, discounts on merch, and shout outs on this show. Speaking of which, let's do it. Thank you to our newest members of the Stacks Pack, Julia Riley, Emma Byers, Kelsey, Riley Horner, Christina Ramming, Madison McGuire, Mindy Toussaint, Rebecca Moody, Cassidy Wessenberg, and Jessica Igarashi. Thank you all so much for joining the Stacks Pack and putting your money behind the work of this show. The Stacks is a completely independent podcast, so without the support of the Stacks Pack, there would be no The Stacks. If you want to join and support the work that I do on this podcast, head to patreon.com/thestacks. Okay, now it's time for my conversation with Stephanie Foo. All right, everybody, I am here today with Stephanie Foo, the author of What My Bones Know, a memoir of healing from complex trauma. Stephanie, welcome to the Stacks.
Thanks so much for having me on the Stacks. I really appreciate it.
I'm very excited to talk about your book. I have to admit, I basically knew nothing about complex trauma, so I fear that I may be asking you some really basic rudimentary questions, but I also have a sense that I'm probably not alone. So will you sort of, to kick us off, just give folks like a 30 seconds or so, tell them about your book?
Yeah. So my book is my journey of healing. So getting diagnosed with complex PTSD, which many people don't know about. That's not in the DSM yet. And sort of dealing with the shame and pathologizing aspects of that. And going on this whole journey of trying all different therapies, everything from EMDR to mushrooms to IFS to traveling back to my hometown and investigating the intergenerational and communal immigrant trauma that me and my community went through in order to finally come to a place where I feel like I have healed to some degree and have come to appreciate in some aspects my complex PTSD.
Yeah, I mean, this book is really incredible because you take us on such an intimate personal journey and also weave in all this very interesting sort of scientific stuff, for lack of a better word, by me. And I found that to be really compelling because we got to not only see, you know, it's not only a memoir about your experiences, but it's also sort of this bigger text that kind of brings what you're experiencing into a more, I don't know, clinical, maybe that's the right word, sense. And I really like that because I felt like I was learning about you and about complex PTSD.
Yeah, I wanted it to be a book where if you were just diagnosed with complex PTSD and you don't know anything about it, that you can sort of get all of the basics that you need to know through this book, as well as being led through it with my own personal story so that you know that you're not alone.
And was that who your audience was? Like when you wrote this book, did you sit down and say, I'm going to write to other people who have been diagnosed with PTSD, or was there an additional audience in mind for you?
I think that was the central audience. Yeah. I think that when I first was diagnosed and I was reading books about CPTSD, they were all so dismal and boring and dry and usually written by people who did not have complex PTSD. And I wanted there to be something accessible and interesting and real and hopeful so that basically if someone was just diagnosed, they could pick this up and they could not feel so deeply pathologized and broken.
Yeah. Okay. I'm very impressed by you because I kept thinking as I was reading this book, if I had just been diagnosed with something and I had been dealing with something, and then I was also concurrently writing a book about this thing, there's no way I would write the book. So I sort of want to know what prompted you to kind of write what you were experiencing and going through, like in real time or close to real time.
Yeah. So I think I pretty much decided that I wanted to write this book very shortly after I was diagnosed because of the lack of literature that I was able to find. I was just like, how is there not a first person story about this? This is ridiculous. Their first person stories about depression or anxiety or, bipolar disorder. And there was just nothing. It was like this total void, which made me feel so deeply isolated at the point where I was, Googling celebrities, trying to find, is there a celebrity with complex PTSD? So I just feel like less of a freak. And so I was like, okay, if I heal from this, I want to write this book. But also I was aware, like, that's if,
Right.
And so I was kind of like, I want to focus on healing first and foremost. And so while I was healing, while I was going through most of my meditation sessions and EMDR and classes and things like that, I was not writing with an audience in mind at all. I don't think I would have been able to heal really if I had been doing that. I was mostly writing totally stream of consciousness at the time. Just diary entries for myself in terms of like, what have I learned today? Did I get anything out of today? How hopeless do I feel today? It wasn't until I came to a place where I was much happier and feeling more confident and safe in my diagnosis that I actually sat down and did the work. And at that point, it kind of felt like just being a journalist in terms of going through the source material of my journals, right? And cobbling that all together to paint a picture of what my experience had been like.
What was that like for you going back through your journals?
I think at that point, I was feeling much happier and content and like in a good place. And I think a lot of healing from complex PTSD is sort of learning to love yourself and accept where you are and where you were at different stages of your journey.
Right.
So I think going through the journals, there was a lot of reading where I was at the time, even if they were really kind of embarrassing and I was just a hot mess. I was like, my heart went out to that girl. And I was like, oh, I have so much love for you. I have so much empathy for you. I see where you are. And you are trying so hard. I had a lot of admiration for her of how hard she was fighting. I think sometimes it was difficult, but there was a lot of, it was kind of sweet almost seeing how far I'd come.
Yeah, I was also really rooting for you in the book. I think that you did a really good job of capturing sort of where you were throughout the book. And I definitely could tell as a reader that that you were experiencing the things that you were saying you were experiencing. Because, sometimes you read a book and you're like, okay, you're telling me a lot, but like, I'm not getting that from the stories you're sharing. But I was like, really like rooting for you and like cheering you on. And I think that you really captured yourself on the journey so well, which is, it's got to be hard to do.
I guess so. I don't know.
I guess you've only ever captured yourself. You've never tried to capture like a different person, but I don't know. I'm not a writer, so I'm always really impressed when people do writing well. So we grew up, you and I, very close to one another. I'm from Oakland, and my husband's family's from Los Altos. So I also really appreciated the section of you driving down 290. And I was like, 280. And I was like, oh my gosh, I know exactly like where she is and what she's talking about. And there was so much like little Bay Area nuggets that I just personally appreciated in the book. It was a fun little, it's always fun when you get to see where you're from in a book.
My friend got so irritated at me the other day. She's like, how dare you make me hungry by mentioning the It's It factory? I'm like, sorry,
That's
girl.
exactly right. It's It. That's exactly right. I actually have a box of It's It's in my freezer right now for some like very random reason. My husband just bought them during the week of the Super Bowl and we never got to them. So they're there, but they're not the mint ones, which they should be.
Too bad.
Okay. I want to know, like, the thing that I think like the most really like blown away by was the generational trauma and the way that you wrote about it and your family. And I'm wondering, what do you think more people should or could understand about generational trauma? Or what do you think people are getting wrong about generational trauma?
Yeah, I think that, it is a combination of nature and nurture, right? It's not just that our ancestors are passing on their teachings culturally, which they are, of course, but that they are passing it on through our literal genes. And I think that there has been some evidence that trauma gets passed on through our genes and that like we remain fearful from generation to generation about certain things, that we can be anxious. I mean, Holocaust survivors' genes have been changed to make them more hypervigilant, and their ancestors, or sorry, that they're, well, what's the opposite of ancestors? The other way.
Their
their
progeny? I
their
don't know.
progeny, yeah, their kids and then their kids tend to be more hypervigilant because you can see that gene marker changed. But
Right.
it doesn't necessarily always make us weaker. I mean,
Hmm.
these are genetic adaptations designed in order to help us survive, right? We're literally evolving, trying to anyway. And so, there is some evidence that, for example, in the Swedish town of Overkalix, if you were a boy that was starving around the age of 12, 2 generations later, your grandchildren might be more likely to survive and be healthier and less likely to have heart attacks.
Hmm.
So
Yeah.
our grandparents' suffering doesn't necessarily make us weaker.
Right, right, right.
It can make us more resilient in many ways.
Yeah, I guess I didn't quite understand how much of it is can be genetic, like how much of it is passed down, whether it makes us stronger or weaker. Like
Mm.
you have this study about the mice and the cherry blossom scent in that same section of the book. And that was like I had to take a pause from reading the book and like write down a bunch of notes because like the fact that it wasn't just the next generation, but the generation after that, like grandparents or whatever, that was really, I mean, that says a lot, like that's like a major thing to understand about who we are and how we become who we are. And I think I always tell this story on the show, but I'm sure you're familiar. I'm Black. And so I didn't know, I always thought that Black people had a higher risk of heart disease and blood pressure. And it's true that they do in America, but it's not true that Black people, like in Africa and African nations, they don't. And so
Mm.
that has to do with the experience of, racism and prejudice in America. And I just, that was the same kind of thing of like, oh my gosh, a lot of the things we think that we understand about our bodies are passed down or we think are genetic aren't. And a lot of things that we think aren't genetic are because of, experiences. And so that was helpful for me to read about that in your work.
Yeah, I think just to comment on that real quick, there's this Chinese saying that I learned near the end of writing my book, which is a third of the world is under the control of heaven, a third is under the control of the environment, and a third is in your hands, which I think
Mm,
is really helpful to understand about, especially when you have complex trauma, there can be a lot of shame, a lot of self-blame, and you just have to realize that you are a product of your community, of your environment, of your history, of your grandparents' history. There's so much that we do not have control over,
mhm.
which can be sort of distressing at first, but you have to realize that it also like alleviates some of that self-blame and guilt. And you can only take control over whatever agency you do have and make the best of what you do have. And the rest sort of let it go, you know?
Right. Right. Yeah, that's the hard part, right? The like letting go part of like
Right.
convincing yourself that you could do that. I'm wondering if you thought about the work that you've done in complex PTSD and sort of the systemic ways that, like, as we're talking about through our ancestors and through our families, that sometimes these things are passed down, whether positive or negative. And I wonder if you've thought about any of this like more broadly in the systems that are in place, because you sort of talk about racism can cause PTSD.
Hmm.
My guess is that like certain forms of sexism or homophobia can also cause PTSD. And I'm
Hmm.
wondering if like there's ways to extrapolate what you've learned that can help to heal some of these bigger, more broad forms of trauma.
Yeah. How do you heal communal trauma? Is kind of what you're
Yes.
asking. Yeah, I think there's a lot of different things. I think awareness is the first key element. So,
Mm,
knowing about my history, knowing about complex PTSD, knowing about the effect that it had on my brain was what sort of allowed me to go on this journey. And sort of when you're healing from complex PTSD, right, you have to realize, is the threat real or is the threat imagined? And
mm,
so I think part of grappling with that is thinking, okay, I feel triggered or upset right now because I have, historical, personal experience with this. Why might I be triggered right now? And is that truly what's happening here? Right.
Mm.
So I think there are some personal ways that we can deal with it by educating ourselves. I think that tons of systems need to change. I think that, for example, the educational system could do a much better job of, you know, as you were talking about, these conflicts weren't that long ago. Jim Crow wasn't that
Mhm.
long ago. The Vietnam, the Korean Wars, the Chinese Cultural Revolution, these were not that long ago. And yet we really don't have that much of an understanding about how close this is, about how this is what our parents and grandparents survived. And this isn't just, Korean history or whatever, this is American history.
Right.
America is why a lot of these conflicts happened.
Yes.
We were
Yes.
personally invested. This is why we are here right now. So just being able to understand that, having our educational system be able to teach that, I think is really key. I think our mental health care system is completely broken. It caters to only very privileged, narrow subset of our society, which I think is
Mhm.
really messed up. So it should be
Yeah.
accessible. It should be less racist in that, like, the methodologies and the therapies that we have should be able to cater specifically to people of color, and they don't. They're not culturally responsive. So that's part of it. I think we are seeing some aspects of a good shift with the pandemic, I think, in terms of sort of moving away from this pressure to be completely productive all the time and being able to bury trauma with productivity, with financial success, with academic success. And I think moving away from this horrible, highly stratified capitalistic environment that we have, where we have
Yeah.
to work constantly and don't have the time or resources to expend on our mental health, and divorce our self-worth from our economic output, that's pretty key. So if we
Right.
can do something about that, that would be really helpful.
Yeah. Please. Can we please?
And then, yeah, just I think it's really important to just talk more about trauma, to normalize sadness, and to learn how to take care and love each other better. Because
Mm.
PTSD, complex PTSD, is a relational trauma. It's about how we relate to each other, and then how you sort of lack trust in other people because of that. I mean, you're saying, you can develop complex PTSD from experiencing a lot of racism. Okay, well, I guess we need to fix racism then in order for
Yeah.
people to actually feel safe. So, how do we
Right.
learn to treat each other with kindness and respect? And I think that some aspect of that was true in Mott Haven, where you really have this mini society in which you're educating people how to treat each other, how to listen to each other, how to like resolve conflicts kindly and empathetically, and how to like love each other instead of just focusing entirely on rigorous academics. If
Yeah.
we had some form of that in our society, I think we would be a lot better off.
Yeah. Just for people who haven't read the book yet, can you tell them about Mott Haven? That was a really special moment in the book.
Yeah, I wrote about going to the school in the Bronx called Mott Haven, which has, I think, about a third of their student population are foster children. So these are children who have undergone a tremendous amount of trauma, and the rest of the population is generally underserved kids who are struggling with poverty. And so it's just overall a bunch of kids who've seen a lot of hard stuff. And so the focus of the school is not to get them the best grades, but to give them the most stable learning environment possible, and to sort of give them a really safe, healthy, happy space where they can learn to be good people and who love each other, if they don't have that at home. So a lot of it is learning how to resolve conflicts with friends, learning how to
Mm.
trust each other, not punishing kids, but instead, if they have fights with each other, teaching them how to work those fights out with each other and to talk about their feelings. It was one of the most beautiful experiences I'd ever seen, watching these kids who'd suffered through so much but had so much emotional intelligence because of the
Mm,
school that they went through. They were just so good at saying to each other, like, I forgive you, or what's wrong, or expressing their needs, you know? And I was
mm.
like, oh my God, if only I had learned this in school.
Right. Yeah. It was like a jarring reading experience, that part, because I was like, what is happening? Like, what is this alternate universe where children are being taught things that are actually relevant to their future life experience? I've never heard of such a place. And like contrasting that against your experience going back to your high school and all of your teachers basically being like, no, the kids here are totally fine. They're just like sometimes have a hard time making their essays sparkle or whatever the phrase was. Like, just felt so different, you know? And like, I think that my experience and probably a lot of people's experiences are much closer to your experiences in high school, like that the teachers weren't necessarily plugged into what was going on with the kids. Um,
Yeah.
so that moment really stuck out to me. Do you feel like this book sort of changed from what you set out to write? Like, did you have a clear idea of what you wanted the book to be when you got started? And is that what I'm holding in my hands?
Actually, yeah.
Oh, awesome. I love that.
Yeah. I think after I had done the majority of my healing and research, kind of right before I started seeing Dr. Hom, but after I had everything else, I wrote an outline of the book, and it was really based on I went through the Collected Schizophrenias
Mm,
by Esme Wei-Jun Wang, obviously, and then I just really kind of mapped it out. And I wanted it to be a mix of science and personal stories. I thought hers was pretty good. I think mine winds up being a little bit more personal, maybe. But I knew that there were a bunch of different big ideas that I had
mm,
hit in my recovery that I found to be really important for me. And I kind of wanted to get all of those in there. I think the main thing that really changed actually from like my first draft and first sort of idea of what the book was going to be to now was I actually the first 50 pages of this book are about my childhood and a lot of the child abuse that I endured.
mhm.
And I think in my first draft of it, that part was really short. It was like 10 pages long
Okay.
because I think I had just read so many trauma books where you're
Mhm,
immersed in the trauma for most of the book or the entire book.
mhm,
And it can be just really draining and painful. And that's
mhm.
not to say there isn't a place for that. There is, of course there is. But I just wanted to have mine be mostly about the journey of recovery as an adult, which I don't think you see as often
Right, right.
because I wanted to provide sort of like a roadmap for people who are about to go on that journey. Because, yeah, I had no idea what that would look like. But then my editor was like, you can't write about a healing journey with nobody understanding what you're healing from.
Right.
So
That makes
I
sense.
needed to flesh that out. And that was pretty tough.
That's what editors are good for, letting you know that those kind of things, right? Like, you got to add a little more.
Yeah.
What was the hardest part of writing this book and what came easily?
Well, one of the easiest parts that barely got edited out actually, and just is kind of like in there almost exactly as it was in its first draft, was all of my sections with Dr. Hum, my therapist.
Mm, yeah.
Because that was almost kind of purely journalistic because I literally had all of our therapy sessions recorded. And so I went through them and read them and plucked out my favorite bits. And it was like creating a radio story or a piece of journalism. And also, I think going back into those sessions kind of feels like a warm hug. It was really,
Mm,
I loved my therapy sessions. I love my therapist. So that was really fun. The hardest part was the beginning. So,
yeah.
my childhood trauma. I think what was really difficult about it was that I probably wrote it like 30 times. It was
Oh my
ridiculous.
gosh.
And so, yeah, I probably have written like whatever, 500 pages of me being abused. And it's ridiculous because each time I would put it in front of eyes and they would be like, we can't feel you at all. Because obviously I'm
Mm,
so dissociated.
sure,
And
sure.
like that's the only way I can go back and access that is by being dissociated. I don't even quite remember what it really felt like to be that girl put in these like horrific situations where my parents were threatening to kill me or in sometimes actually jeopardizing my life.
Right.
Or, my mom trying to kill herself and blaming it on me. And I think that the only way that I was finally able to sort of make it happen was to just get in front of it. And you've read the
Mhm.
book, that at a certain point, I'm just like, you know what? I have no idea how this felt.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
fuck you for asking.
Right. Exactly. That was my guess of what would have been the hardest part, but I mean, it makes total sense, right? That would be the hardest part.
Yeah.
Is there anything that you wish was in the book that is not in the book?
There were a couple of really cool places that I visited, like Mott Haven, that were doing really
Mm,
awesome trauma, particularly with immigrant communities.
mm.
And I wish that I would had made it in there, but I understand why it didn't. It would have been way too long. So maybe in the second book.
Okay. Oh, we'll get to that, I guess, later. Thank you for that intro. I have to ask you about this. I know that some authors don't have any relationship to this next question, so you can feel free to tell me that this wasn't part of your process, but the cover of your book is so
Mm.
incredibly gorgeous. And I just want to know what the process was like, if you were a part of it at all. And if not, we can not talk about it. You
No,
just
I
tell
was
me.
a very big part of it. Yeah.
Okay. It's just so gorgeous. It seems like it couldn't exist without the influence of the author, but please tell us about it.
Yeah, so I think that there was initially kind of a struggle. I think people didn't know what to put on the cover. And I think some early I mean, really, I for the longest time I didn't get any because my editor kept being like, "No, the ones they're sending me are not good." And then eventually I got to look at them and I understood what she was talking about. There was just like a lot of hands, a lot of tigers, like so many tigers and I was just like, "No, what tigers have nothing to do with this book. I don't get it." And then some kind of ones that were like chopsticks and stuff. And I was
Oh,
like, "Oh,
man.
okay."
Let's not do that.
Um, and it just wasn't coming together. And my best friend, who I write about in the book, Catherine Wang,
Okay. Mhm.
she's been my best friend since the fourth grade. I was complaining about this to her, and she's an art director, which like I never thought to use her for anything, but she was like, "I'm going to art direct your book." And so we sat down together. She brought a ton of ideas to the table and a ton of book covers. And she asked me, "Do you like this? Do you like this? Do you like this?" We made these mood boards and she really thought about like, okay, if we were to use the image of bones, what would you want alongside them? Because I know you don't want anything to be spooky or look like it's going to be a
Right.
mystery thing or like a death thing. And I was like, yeah, I think if there were bones, the only way to make it feel like there's a lot of life and hope to it is just to put lush, lush, lush flowers and plants, just to
Mm.
make life springing from these bones. And a lot of plants that are like really important to me in terms of on the cover, actually, there's, there's rambutans and there's mangoes and there's wood sorrel from California. So I kind of mocked up a couple of covers that looked quite a bit like this, and then they gave it to a real professional and made it look like classy.
Well, it's incredibly gorgeous, and I mean, so far it is my favorite cover I've seen this year of books that are out or books that are coming. It's like
Wow.
breathtaking. I think it's so beautiful. Like I mean, I just love it. I love it so
Wow, wow,
much.
wow. That's so nice of you to say. Oh, and I can't wait
So
to tell
true.
Kathy.
Please do. Please do tell her thank you for creating it with you, because it's really, I mean, like it makes me feel things. So I love it. We'll take a
And the
quick,
designer is Grace Hahn.
oh, okay. Amazing. We'll take a quick break and then we'll be right back. Valentine's Day is upon us and I've got love on the brain. Love for books. Duh. Of course. Hello. Did you forget what podcast you're listening to? I love bringing you all great reads, exclusive author interviews, and behind the scenes book gossip. But I can only do that with your support over on Patreon and Substack. Our Stacks Patreon community, also known as the Stacks Pack, is where you can go for book club meetups, a private, very active Discord, and a year-long mega reading challenge to help you achieve all your reading goals. Plus, you also get that monthly bonus episode. Now, over on the Substack, you can subscribe to my newsletter, Unstacked, where I keep the book conversations going. I also give you a healthy dose of sports and pop culture, definitely some hot takes happening over there. And again, that bonus episode. If you don't have a few dollars to spare, don't worry. There are free options on the Substack and the Patreon to get you a little extra Stacks magic. Making this podcast is a total team effort, and by supporting my Patreon and my Substack, you allow me to support my amazing team that makes the show possible every single week. So if you or your friends are looking to meet other book lovers and support this indie podcast, come hang out with me on Patreon, Substack, or both. I would love to have you. And since we're talking about love, you can gift subscriptions to the Patreon and the Substack for that special reader in your life. For the Stacks Pack, head to patreon.com/thestacks. And for the newsletter, head to tracythomas.substack.com. And also, there are links to both in the show notes. Okay, see you in the Stacks. Okay, we're back. Before we dive into sort of a little bit more about your process and how you work, I want to make sure that I ask you about this because this came up in the book. I believe it was C. Pam Zhang whose essay you mentioned about writing about her experiences and some trauma there. And you sort of get to this a little bit in the book about, the experience of Asian immigrant families and talking about trauma and how that's sort of taboo. And I'm wondering, for you, how you were able to work through some of that stuff, or was it something that you sort of were able to work through in your therapy and so you didn't feel the stress or the pressure about talking about it publicly?
Yeah, I think that I've always been sort of the black sheep of my family, and I've always been the one who's been yelling and speaking the unspeakable.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think part of my comfortableness doing this is just kind of that I've always been doing it, and I've always been kind of outcast for it anyway. And so I'm like, well, how much worse could it be at this point?
Sure.
I don't have relationships with either of my parents.
Right.
So I didn't have to worry too much about their response. My family back home in Malaysia, they've only just sort of recently been validating what I went through. I did a story for This American Life a few years ago about my family in Malaysia, and I really worried that that was going to cause a lot of drama or anger with them, but not really. They really supported me. They started saying for the first time after that, and now that the book is coming out, that they really believe me for the first time, because they sort of denied the abuse that was happening to me for decades, or minimized it, or made me feel like it was my fault. And now that it's like on fancy radio shows or in books, they're like, oh, maybe it's real, which is a little frustrating.
Right.
Right. Because I don't really need you to validate this now, quite honestly. I think the person who needed it most was the 10-year-old me who was being severely abused. She could have used your help, but that's okay. We all come around to things a little late sometimes, I guess.
Right. Is there any, I know for me sometimes when I talk about things on this show that are Black specific, that I get nervous of how people who aren't Black will receive or understand it. Did you have any worry about that, about your readers who don't have similar life experience to you not understanding what you were saying, or extrapolating the wrong stuff? Was that anything that you had to work through?
Yeah, I did worry about that. I worried about there being uncomfortable stereotypes.
Yeah.
I felt like I ran it by a lot of Asian Americans, actually, including kids from my high school. Before I sent it to print, and them saying this is true, this was our experience, was really helpful, because I was like, well, what can I do? This is my personal experience. This was our experience. That deserves a voice, and how you choose to interpret it, that's up to you. If you want to see a different voice, give another Asian American author the opportunity to write it.
That's right.
But this is mine, and I'm not responsible for how whether you choose to believe it's valid or not.
Right.
um, but also, I think it is countering a very specific stereotype of the model minority. I
Yeah.
think the stereotype was of that Asian kids are do really well academically, we're really ambitious. And so how could we be suffering from mental illness or generational trauma? Like we've figured out a way to erase the conflicts that brought us to this country in the first place. And I'm like, wait a minute. No.
Right.
That's not right. I mean, people can have both of those narratives in their head if they want, and I encourage them to grapple with that.
Right. It's so interesting you said that. We're reading Toni Morrison this month for the book club. And one of the things I love about what Toni Morrison does is that she oftentimes presents, you know, a thing that we think we understand, like a stereotype, if you will. And then she complicates it a lot by being like, okay, but this is also part of that thing. Or
Hmm.
this is also like, you can have the model minority, but you can't have it without the fact that so many, parents of children who now are excelling in school went through horrible experiences at refugee camps, or, like you can't just have it as is. You have to take it with the truth of the thing. And I think your book does that beautifully, of like talking about both the stereotypes that we understand and also how those stereotypes come to be, and like how there's a lot
Right.
more complicated interpersonal experiences that lead to a child feeling like they need to get all A's, right? Or a parent feeling like they need their child to get all A's, even if, the outcome that you see is that, it doesn't necessarily mean that that's what is happening underneath. And I think you really do a good job of complicating. And also that, like, there are plenty of Asian kids who don't get all A's, and that's
Yeah.
there too, and
Yeah.
like, I just think you brought up so much richness in a community that's so often flattened. So I really appreciated that in your book.
Thanks.
Okay,
Yeah.
we're going to do sort of a hard turn to your writing experience, which is, how did you know you wanted to write?
I've been writing my whole life. Interestingly enough, I was sort of forced to write.
Mm,
I started writing when I was 5 or 6 because my mom forced me to write journals, sometimes multiple times a week, of my experiences. And they had to be long and very interesting and well written and couldn't have spelling mistakes or grammar mistakes, or I would get beaten for it,
right.
which is really interesting that what started as something that I was forced to do and abused because of turned out somehow to be my salvation and the thing that allowed me to crawl out of that trauma. Kat Chow pointed out this quote in my book recently, which was something my grandma always used to tell me: when the sky falls, use it as a blanket.
Mm,
And I feel like the book is the blanket.
mhm,
But, I think in my teens, my early preteens and my teens, I started journaling a lot. And I have pretty comprehensive journals that whole time of like, I was very, very alone at that time. I had no one to talk to. My parents couldn't understand. I have no siblings, no family in the United States, no friends. And so this was my confession booth. This was how I got my ideas out. And it's a safe place for me. As an adult, it's kind of where I talk myself up. I like put
mm.
down all of my fears about myself and then counter them with arguments about why I'm wrong. It's evolved a lot throughout my lifetime, the act of writing.
Having it be something that you've been doing your whole life, how does it change when you do it professionally versus when you do it, to talk yourself up? Like, how do you navigate? It's the same, act of writing, but I'm sure you approach it in really different ways.
Yeah, I think it's different when I have an audience, of course. I think a lot about plot and what would be interesting to people
Mhm,
and how to like build suspense. I think when I write for myself, it's mostly like feelings. And when I
mhm,
write for an audience, it's mostly scenes, actually,
mm, mhm,
because I was a radio journalist for over 10 years. And when you write a radio script, it's kind of like a film script
mm,
in which you have to have like sort of scene idea. And that's how you build the drama and you create an image of things in people's heads. And so I think a lot of putting this book together was thinking of the best scenes of my life, I think,
Mm.
and what would be most compelling, which would illustrate the ideas that I wanted to get across best. Yeah, and it's kind of reflex for me too at this point.
Yeah.
I think most of the book, in terms of the therapy and stuff, it was pretty easy to come up with those scenes and do that. I think that the part that was hardest was like obviously the child abuse stuff. I was like, which incidents of my child abuse would be most entertaining
Right.
for the reader? Like
Right.
it's such a messed
Which
up
of my
thing.
nightmares is the most compelling to
Yeah,
share with strangers? I get that. That seems absolutely terrifying.
yeah.
You sort of answered my question about, I had a question for you about sort of, you know, the difference or the similarities between writing a book and working in, you know, audio productions. And I think it's interesting that you kind of approach both with a scene intention. I actually really like that. I love a scene.
Yeah.
Um, how do you make time to write? Where do you write? How often? Do you listen to music? Do you have snacks and beverages? Are you in an office? Are you on a couch? Like, can you sort of set the scene for your writing?
Well, I mean, I think a lot of my writing, like the journaling that I went through when I was healing, took place in cafes.
Okay.
Particularly, there was one cafe, Milk and Pull in Bed-Stuy, that I spent a lot
Okay.
of time like crying in, and to the point where they would like give me free scones a lot. Um, but almost this entire book, yeah, I think the whole book is really written in the pandemic.
Wow.
So I got my book deal in February 2020,
Oh my
January
goodness.
2020. Yeah. It was mostly written either in my office if my husband wasn't working in it, or if my husband was working in it, I would work on the kitchen table
Okay.
in this very cramped, messy apartment that we had that was totally falling apart. Holes in the walls everywhere. It was like it was an utter mess.
Oh no.
It was okay. We moved in February 2020. We actually moved in above my in-laws because
Oh, okay.
Joey's mom was sick and we had moved in to take care of her. So also there's a lot of, you know, checking in on her and caretaking and then going back up
Mm.
and writing this book. It was pretty complicated.
Do you have any go-to snacks or beverages? Do you listen to
Oh,
music? Any rituals around your writing?
right. I don't really listen to music. I really like it quiet, but I'll listen to Loskill. I think that's how you pronounce it.
Okay.
Which is just ambient noise music.
Okay.
If my husband was doing construction on our house, which was
Mhm.
happening a lot, um, and um, a lot of Diet Coke,
Oh, yes, a woman after my own heart.
a lot of Diet Coke. And I think during the pandemic, I was cooking a lot, and I was feeling
Mm.
really good about it. My go-to breakfast would be like maybe breakfast tacos
Okay.
with either eggs on nori, or sorry, eggs on rice
Mhm.
with nori and sesame oil, or breakfast tacos with potatoes and mushrooms and eggs and like crema and on top and salsa. Or let's see, I made a lot of Chinese food that I had never had to try to make before by
Mm.
hand, but like nothing was
Mhm.
available and we couldn't eat any out anywhere, you know?
Right, right, of course.
Um lot of Chinese snacks too. Like I really like Lay's potato chips with Asian flavors, like
Mm.
nori, or my favorite is the spicy crawfish.
I've never had that.
It's really good.
Oh my god, okay. You've opened up my eyes. I love a snack, which is why it's a very important part of this podcast is to make sure everyone gets on record talking about what they're eating. You've
Yeah.
passed the test. You've given me quite a bunch of things. A lot of people try to be like, "Oh, I like celery." And I'm like, "No, that's not gonna cut it around here."
This was like my sole joy in the pandemic was eating. So,
Yeah. It's honestly same. Eating and cooking. I mean, I still am cooking so much more than I used to because I just love it and I've always loved it. But having to go back to it now, I'm like, oh, planning out my meals, going to the farmer's market, like getting things to make and try.
yeah,
So
same.
You mentioned that when you were a kid, you had to write and you had to spell everything correctly. But another really important question that we ask around here is what's a word you can never spell correctly on the first try? Or are you still a great speller?
I'm not that good a speller. There's a
Okay.
lot of words that have like a lot of doubles next to each other, like bookkeeper
Hmm.
or whatever,
Oh, yeah.
confuse me. It's horrible. The only word that's coming to mind is like diarrhea. I don't really know where the H goes a lot of the time.
Uh, That's a
Um,
great word, and I also have no clue how to spell it. I could probably sit here for 10 minutes and give you 19 different spellings, and none of them would be right. Oh my gosh, I love that. That's you win best word so far ever on the show. We've been doing the show for a long time. This question got invented in fall 2019, and you're definitely the winner right now.
Yay! With diarrhea.
Congratulations,
Awesome.
diarrhea. Good luck, everyone else. Try to top that. um, I I guess like writing this in a pandemic and all that was going on around you with your mother-in-law and the apartment and everything. Like, how do you preserve and tap into your creativity? How do you hold on to that part of yourself?
Hmm. I think people are kind of like, how are you creative? And I think like working on deadline, right?
Mm.
For
Hmm.
10
Hmm.
years where I just had to be like I had to make this story in 2 days or 5 days or whatever it is. And you just have to. And there's no, so you sit down and you write it. And if it's crap, then whatever, it's there. And then you go back and you look at it again and you revise it and you keep revising it. I mean, I don't think that I have some secret muse that I tap into. I think that my only real tip actually is knowing my sort of circadian clock well. I know that
Mm.
I'm kind of useless from until like 11. And so I would mostly just do like boring tasks or whatever, answering
Got it.
emails until like noon. And then I would be really productive from like noon to 6 ish.
Mm.
And
I love that.
yeah.
I love that. You think that the deadline thing isn't a thing, but that's actually like a really interesting thing that comes up from different authors depending on their experiences, additional experiences. Like some people say like the deadlines are the thing that make them creative, like that they are able to work that way. And then some people say like the deadlines just totally destroy their lives. So it's interesting to hear you talk about that too. You alluded to this earlier, no pressure, but is there a second book? Do you know what comes next? Can you tell us anything?
Well, okay, I haven't done any work on this really.
Okay, that's
Except
fair. Your book just came out like 2 weeks ago.
yeah. But based on like some of the extra research that I have for my old book, I would like to do a new book entitled The Case Against Therapy.
Mm,
Basically the case against psychotherapy, talk therapy as we know it, which is not to say that it isn't helpful for people. I mean, you saw that it was very helpful for me, but
yeah.
I think there are just a bunch of different therapies, particularly culturally sensitive therapies, that we
Mm,
have not explored as much that are really fascinating and tremendously helpful for people. Like, for example, my Google Docs, my talk therapy even had Google Docs therapy, and that was not traditional in
right.
any kind of sense,
Right.
but it was super helpful for me. Um, and for listeners, that's where like I transcribed all of my therapy sessions into Google Docs and edited my trauma out with my therapist. And just exploring how untraditional therapies have had really huge impacts on different communities, I think is something I really want to do.
Yeah, that sounds incredible. We all can't wait. No pressure. Take your time whenever you're ready. Uh,
Thanks.
for people who loved this book, What My Bones Know, what would you recommend to them to read? What other books do you think are maybe in conversation or good companion pieces for them?
The collected schizophrenias, obviously.
Hmm.
If you want to read really great therapy sessions, more great recollections of what happens in the therapist's office, maybe you should talk to someone,
Mm,
obviously, by Lori Gottlieb. I Seeing Ghosts by Kat Chow.
mm,
We were writing our books in tandem, so I have to mention that. It also deals with grief and to some extent intergenerational trauma. I think if you've just gotten diagnosed with complex PTSD, a really helpful, like very gentle, kind explanatory first step is Journey Through Trauma by Gretchen Schmelzer. Love that book. I think if you're really going through a hard time, Pema Chodron is obviously a great solve. And I think in terms of moving away from this obsession with capitalist productivity and being able to feel your feelings more, How to Do Nothing. So, one of my favorite books. And I'm just going to say Braiding Sweetgrass because it's my favorite book and I don't care if it's in conversation with this because everyone should just read it. So there.
Great. You're allowed to. That question is really for you to do whatever you want with. I love it. We love a book recommendation around here. So thank you for those. That was really good too. That was like professional. Really well done. So this is sort of, I guess, my second to last question, which is just, what do you hope folks will keep in mind as they read What My Bones Know?
In the beginning, I have the first page is a trigger warning, essentially.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that reading the stuff, particularly the child abuse stuff, can be really difficult. And so I kind of just wanted to underline that, like, part one of this book, particularly like the first 50 pages, are the hardest pages. And if you need to skip over any explanations of abuse in this book, like, feel free. You're not going to miss anything. Just kind of like speed read it or skip over a couple pages. You'll be okay. If it's really triggering for you, I am there with you. I get it. And just know that, like, maybe the first 100 pages is like the darkest, but then I really tried to be more hopeful, and I'm just kind of affirming experiences kind of over and over and over in the book, because I just wanted the reader to be there with me and okay, and just like I tried to hold your hand as much as possible, like with a kind, loose grip. So just keep that in mind when you're going through the hard stuff, that like it's gonna get softer and warmer real soon.
That's very good advice for folks. Last question. If you could have one person, dead or alive, read this book, who would you want it to be?
Who's the person with the most power to change our mental health system?
Wow, that would be great to know. Then we could just call that one person and then stop having to deal with our senators or whatever the fuck.
Biden? I don't know.
Sure. I don't know if he's the person, but I
don't know.
Maybe someone important enough to fix things so we can all get therapy and be taken care of.
Exactly.
Or not get therapy, depending on what your next book says.
No, we various forms that we should get. The therapy that's tailored to us is what we should get.
Yeah, the therapy we need.
Yeah.
Well, Stephanie, this has been so great. Thank you so much for coming on. Everyone at home, you can get Stephanie's book, What My Bones Know, now wherever you get your books, from your favorite indie, from your library. You can get it from Libro FM. You can get it everywhere. Stephanie, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. This was such a fun interview. I really liked the snack part.
Okay.
The
thank you.
part.
And I didn't even pay you to say that. Everyone else, we will see you in the stacks. That does it for us today. Thank you so much for listening, and thank you to Stephanie for being my guest. I'd also like to thank Courtney Mocklow and Morgan Hoyt for helping to make this interview possible. Remember, the Stacks Book Club pick for March is A Mercy by Toni Morrison, and we will be discussing the book on Wednesday, March 30th with Imani Perry. If you love the show and want inside access to it, head to patreon.com/thestacks to join the Stacks Pack. Make sure you're subscribed to The Stacks wherever you listen to your podcasts. And if you're listening through Apple Podcasts, be sure to leave a rating and a review. For more from The Stacks, follow us on social media at The Stacks Pod on Instagram and at The Stacks Pod _ on Twitter. And check out our website, thestackspodcast.com. Our editor is Christian Duenas, our graphic designer is Robin McCrite, and our theme music is from Tagirigis. The Stacks is created and produced by me, Tracy Thomas.